As parents, we have a responsibility to discipline our children, but we need to be careful that we're not punishing them. Here's Karis Kimmel-Murray.
Punishment and discipline are actually opposites. They have some things in common, so we think they're the same thing, but punishment is done to appease justice on behalf of whoever was victimized. But discipline is actually done on behalf of the offender. It's motivated by love for the person who did the thing, not by a desire to seek justice for the person who was offended.
This is Family Life Today. Our host is the president of Family Life, Dennis Rainey, and I'm Bob Lepine. We're going to spend some time today looking at what grace-based discipline looks like as you raise your children. Stay with us. And welcome to Family Life Today. Thanks for joining us. I had kind of an aha moment not long ago. Some of our listeners know that we're right in the middle of a project we're working on here to create a video series around parenting. And as a part of that project, I've been sitting down with a number of authors, pastors, speakers, doing interviews about parenting. And one of the people I sat down with was Kevin DeYoung. And Kevin's been a guest here on Family Life Today and was on our Love Like You Mean It marriage cruise last year. And so I was asking him about parenting, and I asked him the question, how do you decide as a parent when your kids are going to get grace and when they're going to get discipline? And here was his answer, and this was my aha moment. He said, our kids always should get grace. He said, sometimes the grace they get is discipline. And I thought, that's a good answer, because most of us tend to think that grace means no punishment, discipline means punishment. But I thought Kevin was right. Sometimes the grace God gives us is the grace of discipline, and sometimes that's what our kids need.
And we're joined today by Karis Kimmel-Murray, who knows a little bit about growing up in a home that is reportedly grace-based parenting. Welcome to Family Life Today.
Thank you for having me.
Is that true?
Yes.
Was there a lot of grace in the Kimmel household growing up?
Absolutely. It was not just this idea that my parents wrote about and spoke about. It is what they lived. And I'm the firstborn of four. I like to refer to myself as the wind dummy. When
they were testing everything on you.
When guys jump out of an airplane, they use what's called a wind dummy. They throw it out. They want to see, where it's going to land, how it's going to land, how things are going to go for it on the way down. And, at the time when my parents launched their ministry, the advice that existed was good advice in a lot of ways, but a lot of it was performance-based. It was sin management-based, and my parents were asking people to kind of abandon those parachutes and to jump out of the plane with a grace parachute. And that's scary to abandon your parachutes. And so I was the wind dummy.
You are no wind dummy. Your book, Grace-Based Discipline, proves you're no wind dummy. This is a great book. Karis has been married to Mike since 2001. They have two teenage daughters, and she does work for her mom and dad at Family Matters. She is creative director there.
Yes.
And in case folks don't recognize the last name Kimmel, your mom and dad, Tim and Darcy Kimmel, are authors and speakers for years. They have spoken at our Weekend to Remember Marriage Getaways, and they've written extensively on the subject of marriage and parenting and family issues, including a book called Grace-Based Parenting. You've now written Grace-Based Discipline. And I'm just curious, did you think that grace and discipline were the opposites of each other when you started writing this, or did you have a good understanding that discipline is a part of grace?
Well, I love your conversation with Kevin DeYoung, because I've had similar conversations with people, and our ministry talks to people all the time who will say something to the effect of, well, Cameron, he hit his sister, but I decided to give him grace. And my dad is usually quick to correct and say, well, it's not the same thing. Permissiveness is not the same thing as grace. Mercy isn't the same thing as grace, and mercy is a positive thing, but mercy and grace are different. And so I think I knew, because I just simply lived it out within our family growing up, that discipline is a form of grace.
Well, let's define grace for a second, because it's something that is thrown around maybe at times like a slang word within the Christian community. We say grace. We talk about being saved by grace.
Yeah. We talk about falling from grace, which I don't even understand that statement.
Yeah, really.
It doesn't compute. It's not possible.
So define it for us.
Well, so it's this ethereal thing that's hard to define and hard to pin down, but we like to say that grace is giving somebody something that they desperately need but don't necessarily deserve. And the thing that they need could be different from moment to moment. And that's what God does with us. He knows what we need, not necessarily what we want or what we like or what feels good, but He knows what we need. And He knows that we certainly don't deserve His goodness and His favor. We don't deserve it, but He has chosen in His love for us to give it to us anyway.
You and your husband, Mike, are parents to 2 teenager daughters.
Yes.
That's a recipe for grace-based discipline. Give us an illustration. Recently, okay?
Sure.
You don't have to name the names, okay?
Yeah. Well, I only have 2 kids, so it's going to be one or the other. They know what this is like.
The guilty will know who they are.
They'll know who they are. Well, so I'll give you an example of doing something wrong, of disciplining incorrectly, and then having to go back and do some damage control. And this happened just a few months ago. My book had not come out yet, but I was at our ministry at Family Matters meeting with my production team and my publishing team, people there who I was trying to impress. Let's just be honest. I was trying to forge ahead, and there were people there that I cared what they thought. And my girls were on a break from school for that week, and so I needed to go into the office that day, and we have a shopping mall that's just right next to where our office is that I dropped them off at, and they are 12, almost 13 and 14 right now. And so I could leave them there and say, okay, when, at this time, I want you to walk on over and check in with me. Just let me know how you're doing. And so as I'm meeting with my publishing team, they walk in to check in. And they were off of school, so they were kind of dressed in their comfortable clothes that day, and we had just left the house. They're both very tall. They grow out of clothes quickly. And one of my daughters, she was wearing a shirt that was not as long as her torso. I guess we'll just say that. Her torso had grown longer than the shirt that she was wearing. And it's one of those things that we don't care around the house, as much. And really, it was a last-minute decision to bring them to the mall. They kind of got in the car fast. I didn't even think about it until the moment that she walked in, and her midriff is showing. Mm-hmm. And here I am, trying to win at parenting and be this parenting book author. And in walks my daughter, and I could tell people noticed, right? And she's a very beautiful girl. And we, of course, have rules about dressing modestly. It's something that I talk about with them that's important. So here's what I did in that moment. I saw people notice. I got embarrassed, and I said, wow, that was a nice shirt choice, said her name. Awesome. Hey, why don't you walk down the hall and go show your papa your shirt and see what he thinks? And we're laughing about it. Sarcasm is one of my love languages. So there was a hint. I mean, I'm putting maybe a little bit more sarcasm on my voice now than it was at the time, but I kind of berated her in front of everyone. And before she even walked out of the room, so I think here's how grace comes into play. Sometimes grace is retroactive. I needed to get grace in that moment from the Lord because I was not acting in love and grace to her. I was acting in self-protection for myself and my reputation. So before she had even kind of turned around to leave the room, I said, you know what, everybody, I want to stop for a second. Can I have everybody's attention? I said, I am so sorry that I just said that. I'm so sorry that I did that. This is not about me. This life is not about me. It's about the Lord. And you are beautiful, and you are the image of God. And I am so sorry that I said it the way that I said it, and that I just did it in front of everyone. Will you forgive me? So in front of everybody that I had been trying to impress, I had to quickly humble myself and ask for forgiveness. But I would say that that's an example of what it can look like when you let grace define your relationships, because God knows how to give us grace by his nature. But it is not our default mode, and it is not our natural bent. And so part of grace is a culture of forgiveness. And so after the fact, quickly me asking for forgiveness, her quickly granting forgiveness, and everybody being witness to that. And she said, hey, Mom, it's not a big deal. And maybe in the moment, it wasn't a big deal in the moment, but I think those are the kind of things the kind of pivotal points that when we mishandle them, they can have a lasting effect. Like it could have become a big deal for her later.
There are 2 points I want to make out of your illustration.
Yeah.
First of all, as a parent, you need to be a recipient of grace, practicing confession with God and receiving his grace for your own sins, your own mistakes and errors. And sometimes that means publicly.
Right.
The second thing is, at that moment, the best thing would have been to have said nothing. And then to have wrapped your arm around your daughter, maybe later privately, and said, when we get home, I'd like to have a little conversation.
Yeah.
Let's have a moment of wisdom here about what's appropriate.
And truly it was on me because we just left the house. It was not really a conscious choice on either of our parts. But it would have been better to say, hey, let's talk when we get home.
It wasn't an issue for you until it was an embarrassment for you.
Well, it wasn't an issue for me, first of all, because I hadn't noticed. Now, if I had really looked and paid attention before we left the house, I would have had her change, and she would have wanted to change. She would have been like, oh, yeah, let me go change my shirt. Because we clearly have standards and stuff. So it was really an oversight until the moment that I noticed it publicly and then felt embarrassed about it. But it wasn't righteous at all.
And I know we want to talk about grace and discipline, but there are some listeners right now who are going, I can't believe he even freaked out over a midriff. I mean, come on, Mom.
Yeah.
A bare midriff on, how old is she, 13?
She's 14.
14 bare midriff? Come on, that can look cute for a girl.
Right.
In fact, if you're so into grace, why don't you just chill a little bit?
Right.
Because they think, again, that grace means...
Grace means license.
Right.
It means no rules. It means no standards. And that can't be what it means because that's not how God treats us. Our Lord is the source of grace. Grace is only a thing because God gives it to us.
As you defined grace being giving someone something they desperately need that they don't...
don't necessarily deserve,
As parents, that's job one with our kids, isn't it?
Yeah, job one. And some of that thing that they need that they don't necessarily deserve is rules and standards, boundaries, understanding, the appropriate. The Lord does that for us. The Bible is full of standards and his ideal for us, knowing that we will not keep it, we will not be perfect, but he doesn't remove those from us. And then when we cross those boundaries and we fall short of those standards, there are consequences for that.
And just as some people have misconceptions about what grace is, I think some people have misconceptions about what discipline is.
Right.
And they think discipline is always punishment. What's the difference between discipline and punishment?
They seem like synonyms. That's how we use them in our language as interchangeable. I'm careful in my book actually not to use the word punishment because when I really started to study, I discovered that punishment and discipline are actually opposites. They're actually antonyms. They have some things in common, so we think they're the same thing. For example, punishment is done to appease justice on the behalf of the victim, whoever was victimized. It's to appease society's desire to see people get what they deserve. And punishment, it's a thing that exists. It's necessary. Certainly in our criminal justice system, it's necessary. But discipline is actually done on behalf of the offender. It's motivated by love for the person who did the thing, not by a desire to seek justice for the person who was offended.
So given those differences, should we ever punish our kids?
We will mess up and punish our kids, but God doesn't punish his kids. And so that was a big discovery in the process of writing this book as I studied, that I came to see that I really couldn't find an example of God punishing his children. Now, that's a key caveat. His children, those who are his, who are in him, have been grafted into the kingdom of God as his sons and daughters. It doesn't happen. He only disciplines them.
So even when Achan hid stuff in the tent and they brought them out in front and they stoned everybody there, you're saying that's still loving discipline from a merciful God.
Yeah, and Moses didn't get to go into the promised land, and all he did was mess up an illustration. But it's about the good of the person who has done the offending. And certainly once you see Christ's sacrifice on the cross and that ultimate atonement made, it really was, an axis on which we saw the kingdom of God come down on earth. And God, rewrote a new law. The new law is grace. Mm-hmm. And, all of the law and the prophets hang upon love. And once that atonement was made, that punishment was the last one.
I think there are a lot of circuits being blown in a lot of parents' minds right now because you do stop and think. I mean, every parent would say, if you ask the question, have you punished your kids and did they deserve it? Parents would say yes and yes. I punished them and they deserved it. And yet as we think about this, God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay when there have been transgressions. Our job as parents is not the punishing of our children, it's the discipling, the disciplining of our kids.
It's training. And as you were talking, Karis, I couldn't help but think about Hebrews chapter 12, where it talks about God disciplining his children. It says, "My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives." And it goes on through the passage there, through the next half dozen verses, and it talks about all the way at the end, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. But later, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Back to what Bob was saying earlier, as you train your children, you are discipling them to know how to respond to life. You're training them in how God would want you to live life his way.
Right.
That doesn't mean at points that they don't bear the consequences of their wrong choices.
Right. Well, I think one of the reasons that we equate punishment and discipline and think that they're the same thing is because they have some important things in common. And one thing that punishment and discipline have in common is pain.
Yes.
Both utilize pain as a tool.
Yeah, let's talk about something for a moment that you mentioned in your book. When you were a teenager, you kind of blew past the curfew substantially.
Yeah.
I love this story because you got busted by the paper boy. Right?
Yeah.
Now, wait, the paper boy didn't come until like 5 in the morning. It must have been way past curfew.
So tell them what happened.
Well, I was actually in college at the time. I think I was 19, and I had spent some time living in the dorms, and I was back at home. My husband, Mike, and I were dating. I don't think we were engaged yet, but we were pretty serious, and I was living back at home at the time, and so I had a curfew again, and I hadn't really for a while because I'd been off at college, and the curfew was not so much my parents trying to be all lame sauce and rain on my life. It was just that I'm the oldest of 4, and when I was 19, my youngest brother was 9. So we kind of had a spread of people living in the house, and my mom always says morning comes early, and now as a mom myself, I know what that means. It's like you're up whether you want to be awake or not.
Right.
And so, not everybody could keep my collegiate schedule, and so I had a midnight curfew, and that afternoon, evening, I'd gone over to Mike and his brother Pat's house. They had a house together with 8 roommates, and we had decided to have a dominoes tournament. Played dominoes, a Mexican train until, the wee hours of the morning. Somebody went on a Jack in the Box run and brought back some tacos, and we were just going for it. And I look up and realize it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And as soon as I realized it, I was like, get in the car, come back home. Parked in the driveway, very quietly closed the door and opened the front door and climbed up the stairs. Nobody was in the living room waiting for me. I went upstairs, went to sleep, got up the next morning at 11:30 and a.m., right?
The crack of noon.
And came downstairs to have some cereal. And my dad was sitting at the kitchen table with a very disheveled looking newspaper. I kind of was giving him the side eye, like, I wonder if he's going to ask me, and I wonder if he knows when I came home, and I'm just going to kind of quietly get my cereal bowl and see if I can be invisible. And he says, "Hey, Karis, just curious, what time did you get home last night?" And I'm starting to sweat bullets.
And now you're faced, do I lie or do I tell the truth?
Right. Well, and so here's the crux of this story. And I don't know how long my dad thought about this before he did it or if it just came to him. But he said, "When did you come home last night? And before you answer that question, I just want you to be privy to some information that I have." I said, "Okay." And he said, "You parked on top of the paper." I was like, "What?" "You parked on top of the newspaper. Your driver's side front tire was up on top of the paper. I had to go get your keys and move the car to bring the paper inside this morning. And, the front page is basically torn to shreds." And I said, "Okay." And I knew where he was going with it, right? And he said, "Because I travel so much, hon, and I have to get up early in the morning to go to the airport sometimes, I happen to know that our paper comes at about 3:30 a.m. in the morning. It gets dropped off." And so he said, "So let me ask you again, what time did you get home last night?" And I said 3:15. Or sorry, I got home at 3:30 and it comes at like 3:15. Anyway, the timeline worked out. I had come home right after it had gotten thrown into our driveway. But that's an example, I think, of the difference between the mindset of punishment and the mindset of discipline. If I was an offender that had committed a crime and the police brought me in and they're interrogating me, they're not going to do what my dad did. They're not going to say, we want to put all of our cards on the table so that you know everything that we know. They're going to see if they can push me into a corner and see what I'm going to do. See if I'll lie. Because as soon as I lie, they know I've got something to hide and they're going to figure out what it is. And it's different with discipline because he wants to give me every opportunity to exit through the door labeled truth. And that's always been how my parents have been. And so in that moment, I knew I have no reason to lie. I'm just going to say exactly when I came home. And he asked me, "Well, why were you so late?" And I said, "Well, we had a dominoes tournament, and it was so nerdy that he just had no reason to not believe me." And it was true, and so I didn't lie. But I think if he had not done what he did in that moment, I might have been tempted to say I came home at more acceptable late hour, like, "Oh, I got home at about 1, still broke curfew, but wasn't as late. It wasn't embarrassingly late like it was, right?"
Were there consequences for your actions?
That time, that's where we left it. That time. But, it made an impression on me. And so discipline is a spectrum that we see with our kids. And so, it was just like a clear, Karis, that 3:30 in the morning is way past when you need to be coming home. And I knew that the reason for that was not because they were trying to control me. I was 19. It was just, I'm part of a family.
Right.
And I need to do my part to try to help the family run smoothly.
Your dad, in the moment, using wisdom, looks at the circumstances and makes a choice. I'm not going to impose some kind of consequence for what you've done as a corrective measure. I'm going to believe that this conversation has accomplished the corrective purpose.
Right.
And as parents, we face that moment often where we got to decide, do I give consequences here? Do I let the moment be what it is? And we've got to cry out to God and ask for his direction there.
His wisdom.
You have to listen to him and don't make every crime, every boundary a big deal, like they're a felon.
Right.
And they need to go to prison. The second thing I want parents to know, and you too, Karis, as a mom of 2 teenagers on the early side of the spectrum of teenage years, there's a point where God in heaven really feels sorry for parents. And just for a moment, he steps out of eternity into time, and he enables parents to catch their kids red-handed.
With the car on top of the newspaper.
With the car on top of the newspaper. And I sat there reading that story, and I broke into the biggest grin. I'll bet your dad at that point I'll bet he was going, thank you, God, for that newspaper. So we can make this a moment of training.
Right.
And not a conviction that results in life imprisonment.
Well, and here's where it's important for all of us as parents to reframe our own thinking about what we're doing, about discipling our children. That's really what is at the heart of the book, Grace-Based Discipline. When we can think about discipline being the process of discipling, that's different than just thinking about punishing your kids all day. We've got copies of Charis's book, Grace-Based Discipline, in our Family Life Today Resource Center online at familylifetoday.com. You can go there to find out more about the book. Again, it's called Grace-Based Discipline. Charis Kimmel Murray is the author, and you can order it from us online at familylifetoday.com. If it's easier to call, our toll-free number is 1-800-FL-TODAY, 1-800-358-6329. That's 1-800-F as in family, L as in life, and then the word today. You know, you think about the dynamic that goes on in a lot of families and the bad patterns of parenting that can develop with any of us. For some of us, it's because we grew up in situations where it's how we were parented. It's what we learned. It's what we observed. One of our objectives here at Family Life is to help husbands and wives, moms and dads, break generational cycles of relational dysfunction. If you grew up in a home where there was tension in the marriage constantly, or where parenting was not done appropriately, you're going to carry some of that over into how you view marriage and parenting yourself. What we want to do is reframe your thinking about marriage and family so that you're thinking more biblically. Our goal is to effectively develop godly marriages and families. We believe godly marriages and families can change the world, one home at a time. And we just want to say thank you to those of you who extend the reach of this ministry every time you donate. That's actually what your donation does. It enables us to take the practical biblical content that you hear on Family Life Today, or that you read online at familylife.com, or that you experience in our events or using our resources. You help us take that message farther and reach more husbands and wives, more moms and dads every time you donate. If you're a regular listener to Family Life Today and you've never donated, we'd love to have you join the team. It's easy to do. Go online at familylifetoday.com to make an online donation, or call 1-800-FL-TODAY to donate over the phone. You can also mail your donation to us if you'd like. Our address is Family Life Today at Box 7111, Little Rock, Arkansas, and our zip code is 72223. Now, tomorrow we want to talk about what you do as a parent when your kids are pushing your buttons. How can you be the grown-up in that situation? We'll talk more about that tomorrow with Charis Kimmel Murray. Hope you can be back with us for that. I want to thank our engineer today, Keith Lynch, along with our entire broadcast production team. On behalf of our host, Dennis Rainey, I'm Bob Lepine. We will see you back tomorrow for another edition of Family Life Today. Family Life Today is a production of Family Life of Little Rock, Arkansas. Help for today, hope for tomorrow.